Hello and welcome to the Magic Mirror Podcast. I'm your host, as usual, Khan the Trinket Mage, and with me is my co-host, 33 Elk.
Hello.
Additionally, we got our other co-host, Salubrious Snail.
Hello, hello.
Okay, we got a fun topic today. We're talking about how we construct new decks, our ideas or thoughts about constructing new commander decks. We're just going to sort of discuss and share our ideas about that. And then afterwards, we're going to get to your questions from the previous episode as well. But before we get into all that, we have to thank today's sponsor, Card Castle, the easy way to sort your collection digitally. If you want to start sorting and scanning your cards today, you can make a free account by using our link in the description below, and you'll get 1 free month of premium access. Thanks to Card Castle for sponsoring the podcast. I think one of the first things we should talk about is when I construct a commander deck, I do not focus on the commander very much at all. And I think, Elk, you're the same, right?
Yeah, generally speaking, I don't focus on the commander at all, unless the commander is what made me want to build the deck. So there's some instances where I'll take a commander first, but it needs to be like a cool legendary design. Like Farrakha is very much that. I really liked Farrakha, so I built my deck around Farrakha. Whereas most of my decks, I'd say maybe like 80% of them, I start with the win and move upward from there.
What about you, Snail?
I don't subscribe to that. This is a card you have all the time. I am almost always building commander first. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm building like top down, my commander's on the board, and then I'm doing stuff that synergizes with that. I have my counter rate commander thing that I'll do where I will kind of build sort of around the commander, like fill in weaknesses of the deck with the commander. So I'll pick out a commander and then I'll make a deck that is deliberately weak in areas that are solved by the commander. So I like to think that I'm not building decks in a super conventional framework, but I do focus on the commander pretty heavily because I think that's a very important part of a deck.
Yeah, I mean, to be clear, it's not that the commander is irrelevant to my deck. It's not like, I'm building 5-color pile and I'll just put Chromat in the command zone because why not? But I usually try and fulfill certain archetypes. For example, one thing that I just like to brew around is a control deck that does not use blue, and nor does it use mass land and no stacks pieces, or hard stacks, I guess. So right now that's my Heliod list. Doesn't have any, Winter Orb effects or anything like that, but it is still a control deck and it's not using blue. So I started with like the premise, and then I try and find pieces for that, and then a commander that fits on top is like the last piece of the puzzle.
I like it when my commander does like a primary thing for my deck, but also there's a secondary thing as well. So there should be one piece of primary utility that the commander provides, but then, somewhere in the building process, I can come up with a secondary piece of utility. So typically I will pick my commander early and, have some parts of the deck that kind of loop in with the commander, but then other parts of the deck where I'm kind of starting with those and figuring out how the commander ties in.
Do you have an example of a primary secondary use that you could use?
Sure. So
sorry to put you on the spot there.
No. This is part of what I like to do with partner commanders, because I will have one of them that I pick as kind of the core of the deck. So Malcolm is the core of my Francisco Malcolm deck. Yoshimaru is the core of my Yoshimaru Inara deck. But then the secondary piece is something that gives me an additional game plan to build off of. So and that's kind of, I'll start out with kind of the main thing, and then I'll add in the sauce. Also with like my Rada deck. Rada is a ramp piece on a basic level, but I can also add in the special sauce of, I can do things on combat steps because I get this extra mana. And I have things that loop into the commander in other ways. So I'll have these, situations where I have the core function of the commander, but then I like to find an additional one that I can kind of orient the deck around a little bit.
Partners are a good example of that, because you can really have, this is my commander and then this is my support piece, like very much in the command zone.
Yeah, I can see what you're saying, Snail. Still, how I first approach a deck is with how do I want to win the game first, mostly. Asterisk, mostly. If I'm not building starting with a commander in mind, I'm building with a certain powerful card in mind that I want to win the game with. Recently, that's been my Grixis Haymakers. I built a Cormella the Glamour Thief deck, and one of the main wins in that deck is Worst Fears, and I knew I wanted it to be Worst Fears. Worst Fears, for those that don't know, it's 7 and a black for a sorcery that lets you control target player during that player's next turn, and then you exile Worst Fears. So I started here with Worst Fears, and then I reached for Wishclaw Talisman, because it's really funny to Wishclaw Talisman for the Worst Fears, and then control the player you give the Wishclaw Talisman to, and then give it back to yourself while you're controlling their turn.
That's awesome.
That's funny.
That was A and B. C was double vision effects, right? Whenever you cast your first instant or sorcery spell each turn, you copy it, right? So double vision Alania. So now actually I'm in Grixis. And then Cursed Recording as well. Cursed Recording is a card I fell in love with when I played it in Frank Lepore's Horror Cube. And that's another thing too that I really take a lot of inspiration from, which we can talk a little bit later, is taking from other formats for play patterns and inspiration and stuff for Commander. But I started with those cards, and then I moved backwards from that. I'm like, well, hey, look, Carmela's a mana dork. Very good mana dork at that. And then from there, we start to see now what led into this. What Snail mentioned, Carmela does a bee thing as well. She's really funny with clones. If you Irenicus's Vile Duplication her, Irenicus's Vile Duplication basically is a buyback 0 Carmela. Because if one of your Carmelas dies, you get the Irenicus's Vile Duplication back, and you can just recast it, and you'll always have 2 Carmelas. Because Carmela, when she dies, she returns a instant or sorcery from your graveyard to your hand. And of course, that also makes it really funny with one of my other favorite cards, Saw in Half, right? So you saw Carmela in half, and you get it would be 2 triggers right away, one of which can return the Saw in Half, one of which can return another impactful thing. It's a lot of fun. So I end up getting forking things going on with my commanders, but it always starts with one solid, like, this is how I want to win most games.
Yep, absolutely. I definitely do some amount of that kind of, it's almost like drafting commanders where you go, okay, I want to start here, and then I also want to add in this element because that goes well here. And then, if I add in, white, I get access to these things. I very much so did that with my kind of Shroom slide deck, and I've given the process of that deck before. But basically, I started out wanting to do something with Astral Slide. In the same set, there was Oversold Cemetery, which is a card that seemed kind of funny alongside Astral Slide. You cycle a bunch of creatures, you get them back every turn. It forms a kind of engine, in enchantments. And then I decided I wanted blue as well. So I was like kind of gradually, creeping out my colors. And then I started looking for things that were in that general synergy space. That said, I'm still picking my commander extremely early in my deck building process. Like, I would say the pre-picking my commander part is 10%, 5% of the time it takes to complete the first draft of the deck, typically. Like, I'm picking my commander early. The commander is essential.
There's been decks where I have not picked the commander literally until like the deck is 80-90% of the way done. One of those decks is definitely my double Emrakul Simic deck. That's held like Clement the Worrywart. And the main thing Clement does is sit in the command zone like a cheerleader until I need him to start looping Emrakuls with Aether Channeler or Mana War. Basically, Clement just lets you bounce stuff with lower mana value whenever you play a creature. So you would cast Emrakul, bounce your Mana War, and then replay your Mana War, return Emrakul the promised end to your hand, or, whatever. One of these like huge, stupid Eldrazi, just to return their cast triggers repeatedly. That was the main thing that brought me to Clement in the end, is because he's one of the only cards that let you recur cast triggers without having to run like a horrible card quality object like a Crystal Shard or something. Right?
Interesting. Yeah, that makes sense.
So we've talked about here, this is like top-down design versus bottom-up design, which, for Commander is kind of like a bit of a classic point of contention. But what I want to ask you now is, when you construct your Commander deck, are there any restrictions you place on yourself or on the deck?
Not really. Like, some archetypes I don't like to play as much, but I don't think there's really any hard and fast deck building rules I hold myself to.
Yeah, I'm very much...
That's not true. What? Do you not play within like a specific budget usually? Am I crazy?
I don't consider that a deck building limitation. I consider that a wallet limitation.
I mean, like...
Big wallet homies out here might disagree, but...
I guess if you're like...
I'll go higher budget on some decks. Like my Inara dog deck. That deck ended up pretty expensive because legendary lands are expensive. So, I don't even necessarily hold myself to a limit there. Although I find that oftentimes most decks can be built on a budget of $80. You don't need all the fancy stuff.
Yeah, sorry, I thought you were doing like $25 budget stuff still.
No, not really.
Oh, okay. All right, never mind then. my B.
Yeah, and me personally, I'm also not really that big on restrictions. I mean, there's certain cards that like I just don't play because I don't find them fun. Like I never would put like a deflecting SWAT in a deck per se. Like I just don't like the design of that card, so I don't run it. And then very similarly, I'm not a big fan of like, I love tutors, but I'm not a fan of like demonic tutor, like I wouldn't run like anything that's just like kind of unrestricted, go grab anything. Cause for me, part of the fun is like having like a tutor that's like on theme, right? So in the Grixis deck I was describing earlier, the fact that I can give the Wishclaw Talisman away and then control you and then make you give it back, that's really fun. So I'm really seeking like a lot of like gameplay implications for every single card I add, and not just like, oh, this card's great, I'm going to put Rhystic Study in my blue deck, right? I try to stray away from like, really overtly powerful cards like that. And of course, I just described a fucking Emrakul deck, but still.
Yeah.
I have two limitations is that I am careful not to put cards where they don't belong. And I've seen some people object to that. Like, I don't want Waste Not in my Malfagor deck. I don't want, what was the new discard payoff?
Monument to Endurance.
Yeah, I didn't want that in my Shroom Slide deck. All sorts of other examples of kind of powerful cards that I didn't want because they felt out of place to me. I guess other people probably might see that as a restriction, but it's not even that I would never play with those cards, never put them in any deck. I just don't want them in this deck. They don't fit the vibe. They don't fit the power level. They don't fit what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, I want to get back to power level restrictions and like staying within a specific, especially in the context of brackets. But before that, for me, my restrictions are generally like, I try to stay away from like EDH Rec Top 100. And whenever I do a theme of some sort, I try not to pick the most popular commander in that theme. That doesn't always happen, but like generally I try to avoid that. So like Tawnos is my artifact commander for Izzet. He's not the most popular Izzet artifact commander by a wide margin. And I kind of like having a slightly unique commander. I think it's fun to bring a commander to the table that people have to look at and read.
It is kind of fun. Yeah, there's an appeal to that.
Yeah. Otherwise, I don't have any like particular restrictions. It's whatever the deck calls for. So in terms of power level, let's jump into power level. I'll say a little more about, I guess, restricting a power level here, but I'm curious what you guys have to say. So in terms of power level, I have no problem playing like generically strong cards, depending on my theme. I find that I'll use my Tawnos list for an example. My Tawnos is a bauble deck that is built around Salvaging Station. It's pretty jank. It's pretty slow. It has a lot of moving parts. It's not very good. So to power it up a little bit so I can just play with other bracket 3 decks without sweating it too much, I do have some strong cards there. I have Psychrift in there. I don't think I have Rhystic Study, but I have other random game changers in there. And I kind of like optimizing my jank. Like I like having a really jank thing and powering it up so it can hang with stronger decks. But then in other decks, the Roxanne list I'm working on, it intentionally does not have that because it's trying to be bracket 2. But I don't mind playing generically powerful cards when the list needs it.
Me, I almost never do that. I think partially it's just because if I'm building something kind of janky and I really want it to play at a higher power, I think that poses almost like a really fun challenge to me. Like I have to optimize this thing. I have to, cut every last bit of fat. Now, obviously, if I'm playing something that is running like a lot of kind of pet cards for me, it's running, a lot of kind of clunky stuff just inherently, then doing that sort of optimization process is kind of going to kind of defeat the point of the deck. But if I'm doing something that's kind of low bracket 3-ish and I want to hang with stronger decks, I think there is a fun challenge in, not necessarily conceding to the more powerful cards and forcing myself into like an optimization mission where I, figure out how I can pull this list tighter.
Yeah, I mean, I run my Kellen deck pretty frequently, and that's the one that optimally tries to like Bruna Gisela meld into, Brizella and then have Gaddock Tegan play. So that way the only thing my opponents can cast are big creatures and they don't get any other spell from their hand or anything. So in that deck, the only game changer I run is T-Pro. And that's because it's a Selesnya Hate Bears deck. And I feel like I get absolutely blown out by Toxic Delusion, what have you, if I don't have that card, right? So I am hanging at bracket 3 most of the time is what I feel in terms of this power level discussion. And it's not even like, I feel like this is like something that trips a lot of people up because I have decks that are game changerless. Judith the Scourge Diva is one. And that is a firm bracket 3 deck. And in fact, it's probably one of the more powerful ones that I own, right? And Kira is technically like, if you wanted to like a robot look at the deck and be like, oh, you have 3 game changers. This is bracket 3 then, right? Kira, honest to God, I might just make the small upgrades necessary to actually make her bracket 4. Because legitimately that deck is a war crime.
That deck is like, yeah, it's the play patterns as are really strong. It's just, classic green being broken. But like when you're like all greater good 20 or whatever, like the deck, it feels really busted.
Oh, yeah, of course. So Kira is definitely one of those decks where it's like you really can't look at the cover of a deck, because like I wanted to go into Kura having this cute little bracket 3 land combo deck. It's not possible. This is a red alert bracket 4, even though it looks like a 3 to maybe someone with an untrained eye. But no, I like typically, like I said, I'm around bracket 3, just trying to make some silly cards that I like to play with work.
I feel like every deck I make just ends up kind of bracket 3. I don't even focus on brackets too much. I feel like I kind of just construct the deck, and then usually it's probably not like a fast combo list or like a hard stack deck, so it's not 4. And then I don't know if there's 4 game changers, maybe I'll like cut 1 and then call it a day there. I feel like most things just kind of ends up bracket 3.
I've been mostly focusing on brackets with the upcoming MagicCon Vegas and eventually Atlanta as well.
Yeah, so, I want to make some changes and really like hone in on a few of them. How about you, Snail? Do you make any changes in accordance with brackets typically?
No, I haven't really. I have a few decks that are kind of hanging at like low to mid bracket 3, and I don't really feel the need to change those. Like if they're a little weak at the table, that's fine. I'm not too worried, and I always have like kind of a higher bracket 3 deck or multiple. I have no idea how powerful my Brina deck is, honestly. We're gonna figure that out. But yeah, I definitely for some decks it is nice to have like a very clear bracket distinction. Like I have most of my decks that are clearly bracket 3. I have my one deck that is clearly bracket 2, and I think it's good to have some distinctions around that level. I think in the 3 to 4 it gets a little bit muddier for me, but that seems fine enough.
I do want to pivot now to the thing I hinted at earlier, which was like sort of getting inspiration from other formats. Has another format inspired any of your decks, either of you?
So I think the vibe of another format, obviously inspired by Malphagor deck. I wanted kind of, scrappy, low resource gameplay. And so that is a, deck to force myself and everybody else into that sort of gameplay. Aside from that, I don't really think so. Like, obviously, I'm going to be drawing inspiration unconsciously all the time, and everything is kind of, a whole lot of the EDH format is taking influences.
Yeah, exactly. What's a mid-range casual EDH deck if not Jund,
Yep.
I definitely attempted to build Lantern Control. It's really bad. It's quite bad.
There was a Lantern Brew. I forgot who did it. So someone in the comments, please give credit where it's due. But there was a Lonus Cryptozoologist Lantern Control deck like floating around. And I was like, that's a fun idea. Because Lonus, you don't have to sacrifice like any clues besides 1 to lantern the top of someone's deck.
Right. So you have a lamp. Oh, interesting. So what I did was I played Zur the Enchanter as my commander, and then Zur could grab
Field of Dreams?
Oh, it could grab Field of Dreams, yes. But it could also grab Artificer's Intuition, which lets you search for baubles. And then you could grab the Lantern or any of the mill rocks off of Artificer's Intuition.
Oh yeah, tutor for a tutor for a tutor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We love it.
Yeah, for me, I was on Xanathar when I tried it out.
Oh, the Sultai guy?
No. Xanathar, the Beholder from Guild Kingpin.
Oh.
Yeah, he lets you future sight an opponent's library.
Yeah.
So the mill rocks serve double duty in that deck. You can either lantern control people, or you can mill a card that's like blocking your path on your Xanathar quest for glory by casting your opponent's spells.
That's pretty sweet. I feel like maybe tangentially, I've also made decks that are inspired by like legacy lands, although I don't have anything like that right now. I feel like none of my decks are currently inspired by other formats because I haven't been playing other formats as much outside of maybe some Pauper here and there.
I think most of my decks are kind of inspired from other format like play, which is really funny to think about because I really wasn't like, I was like, oh yeah, Tekathal's Dice Factory. That one's obvious. That it's Dice Factory Modern. That's a pretty popular tier 3-4 deck. Somewhere around there.
Popular tier 3 deck? Yeah, sure.
Yeah, no, like it got a little bit more popular when Ugin got printed. Anyway, we're not a modern podcast, but that deck's based on that deck. And then there's a couple that I literally directly, like I said, Grixis Slop, this deck here with Cormella, Cursed Recordings in there because of Frank Laporte's Horror Cube. So a lot of the cards I've played in Cube, and I'm sort of bringing those to Commander because I'm just like, wow, this card's busted. Like there's Occult Epiphany, which I played in LSV's Vintage Cube. And Occult Epiphany is a broken magic card if in the right deck. It's X and a blue, draw X, then discard X, and then you create a 1/1 white spirit for each creature type discarded, or each card type among the cards discarded. So if you discard like Baleful Strix to this, just for 1 mana, you get 2 spirits. So like it interacts really funnily with like cards with multiple card types.
Interesting.
Yeah, and of course this is my Simic deck's a Delirium deck, so it's really good to just like draw a bunch and then discard a bunch and then it's instant speed. Here's all my chump blockers. Surprise. You're not hitting me for any damage, and I have Delirium on now.
Speaking of getting inspiration from Vintage Cube, my friend Hans made an EDH deck recently. I don't know if he's going to build it in paper, but it was a deck that was inspired by what it feels like to play Vintage Cube. Just like Maelstrom Wanderer, mid-range stuff with just like a lot of random, just like a Plasm Capture in there. This town ain't big enough in there. Dak Faden. Just like a whole bunch of random stuff. That like only kind of works together, and I respect that. That's his bracket 2 deck. He's trying to create a vibe.
Okay, I want to ask. I'm going to assume that we have all done this at some point, but if it hasn't, let me know. Have you ever constructed a deck built from one of your other lists? Like you go, this deck is great, but I'm going to swap the commander. I'm going to change the 99. I'm going to revamp the deck in some way to make it a new list, not just upgrading the deck, but like really changing it.
Yeah.
I've done this a few times, but I would like to hear Snails first.
Yeah, Liesa Dobrina, my Hate Bears deck. I was playing a Liesa Hate Bears deck, which I love Liesa. Liesa's lovely. The one that drains opponents wherever they cast spells, myself as well. But I just found that I was having so much fun whenever I played Brina in that deck, which definitely made the deck more powerful. And obviously, I think I swapped a whole bunch of things over to work around counters more and some other things. Cut a little bit of draw because I don't need as much draw when Brina's my commander rather than Liesa.
Yeah, that's true.
For me, I think there's like exactly 2 concrete like things that I can point at that where this has happened to me. The first most earliest was Judith the Scourge Diva. This is my like Death Touch pinging aristocrats combo deck. And this was originally a Kelsian the Plague Death Touch pinging deck. Kelsian gets the experience counters whatever he pings dies. And what I would do is I would try to like find Thornbite Staff and then give Kelsian Death Touch and then just permanently plague win my opponents for the rest of the game. Very fun deck that was, and it wasn't feast or famine at all, and everyone loved it all the time. So no, I swapped to Judith after disassembling that deck, and of course going from Mardu to Rakdos is pretty easy. You just cut the white, and from there as well, I kept most of the death touching stuff. Like there's maybe like 6 cards in the deck that give Judith death touch, but that's far away from the main theme of the deck. It's mostly just Rakdos aristocrats now. And pinging is another theme throughout the deck as well, just like direct damage to objects. So it's now has some actual side roads to the Plague Wind Everyone All the Time game plan that my original list had. So a lot more fun to play against.
I find it so funny that you say that, because I can just imagine somebody playing against this deck that, runs 6 death touch sources for its pinger commander. And if they complain, you're like, oh, this used to be so much worse. You would have been so miserable. You had
no idea. Imagine every white equipment tutor finding the Death Touch equipment and the Thornbite Staff. It was every game, or I was like hated out of the game. It was a nightmare for sure. And then the other time this has happened is I had a God Eternal Oketra deck, which was literally, it did 1 game action, which was White Mane Lion forever, which was cool. For a little bit, but eventually that Staxy Shell, a lot of the good white cards in Kellen that you see are like literally swaps in from that original Oketra list. So like that Esper Sentinel, I originally bought it for Oketra all that time ago. The Cruder the Guard was originally to go find the White Mane Lion in Oketra, right? Like, so like there's a lot of that old Oketra-ness in my new Staxy Hate Bears deck. But yeah, those are like basically the only 2 times I can really think about like a deck that was once one thing turning into another thing. Although I am close to that with Sephara. Sephara might be becoming like a chunkier Angel deck and moving away from Voltron.
I don't think if I've had any other instances of that. Con, have you had any times that you've done that?
Yeah, actually somewhat recently. So I was playing this Tymna Jeska Go deck. So it's Tymna the Weaver and Jeska Thrice Reborn as my commanders. And the idea was I would goad my opponent's thing and then amplify it with Jeska, and then it would hit other people because I thought it was really funny. And I actually talked about that deck on a previous episode. People can go check the playlist and find that. It's the roasting each other's decks. But I ended up changing it, and I swapped Jeska out for Bruce Tarl, Boorish Herder, and it's now I buff my own creatures and attack instead of goading. It's a pretty different list, but yeah, a lot of the pieces kind of ended up being sort of the same because it's like, the Mardu Shell was there, and there were already a lot of like aggressive-y creatures to help with Tymna, so now it's just leaning more on Tymna rather than Jeska.
I'm sure you did that purely because of my negative review. You were just shattered by that, and you couldn't bear to hold the deck together.
I remember the first time I showed you the list, and you were like, I don't get it.
Yeah, it took me a minute to figure out that it was goat, and then I was like, is that funny? That's kind of funny.
I think if you look at my deck list and you have to like pause and go, what the hell are you even doing? Then I won. That's all. Yeah. That's good enough for me.
That's a good place to be.
Do I have any other examples for my current list that changed? I guess Mina and Den used to be Borborygmos Enraged, and I just wanted more consistency instead of this big clunky 8-drop in the command zone.
But I love Borby.
Borb's fun. I mean, he's at the 99. He's there for the late game. When I have like Greater Good and I've drawn 50 cards, I can play Borb and just kill the table. Oh, I have Rurikthar in the 99 of my list, and it's super sweet.
Love Rurikthar. That's such a funny, so Gruul, so aggressively Gruul. Just smash.
Yeah, Borborygmos was a deck I almost built. Oh man, Borborygmos would be really fun with like an Agatha's Soul Cauldron deck.
There was for a while this Rurikthar stacks list in CDH that was floating around, and the idea was you played all the rituals you could, like Orcish Lumberjack, every red ritual, right? And what you do is you just ritual into like a Yakalops and like set everyone back to the Stone Age, and then ritual again into Rurikthar and just hope that nobody could rebuild by the time Rurikthar killed them.
Wow.
And I played against that deck, and my goodness, that hope to kill someone with Rurikthar before they rebuild, it works. Sometimes I was like, well, I guess I lose to Rurikthar. That deck did things.
Can't even be countered with Python Needle.
Nope. Closing thoughts on constructing decks. Any final ideas that you have?
I mean, if we're talking about building new decks, it's honestly just like, how high can I get the floor of a new deck is typically like the benchmark of whether or not I'm going to end up building it. Because for me, I hate when my decks feel like I'm treading water. I'm like, it's so fragile because it can high roll really hard, but it can also just like flop like a fish. I would rather have a lower ceiling and a higher floor than a high ceiling and a high floor. Like you need a mix of both because it's really nice to have that high ceiling play when you're behind, even if it comes at the cost of a low floor. But generally speaking, I would like the list to like be 80% low floor cards. So I'm not running like really risky plays or anything like that. Like God, something that like any deck that puts fucking Krark's Thumb in it would be like an antithesis of what I'm interested in playing. Right? Oh yeah, like even my deck with Dance with Calamity, Roxanne, that deck's mana curve besides Dance with Calamity and is 5. It stops at 5, so I can perfectly blackjack math calculation. I've taken all the joy out of this card. It's.
I think I have a pretty similar answer in the sense that whenever I'm building a deck, usually I'll come up with an idea. Either I will see a combination of cards and figure out a commander that kind of works with them, or I will pick out a commander and see if I can build a deck around them. And then most decks don't make it past this stage. I kind of audit it for, is there enough support for this? Can I do this game plan consistently? Is it going to be kind of fun for me? Is it going to be interesting for me long term? Because I think there are lots of decks that can be interesting for a few games and then not interesting long term. And then, depending on how highly I scored on those other things, how much fun is it for my opponents? Because if something is kind of meh in a couple departments and then miserable for my opponents, then I'm not going to build that deck. And then I think budget comes into account if I'm building it in paper, because if I have a really silly deck, but it's only like $50, I might just buy it. Like if it's kind of miserable. I did that with my Fiend Hunter deck. Like it's just the stupid Fiend Hunter combo deck that is wildly inconsistent and super fragile. And I would feel bad if I spent an actual deck amount of money on it. But if I'm spending budget deck amounts of money on it, it's much easier for it to kind of pass my series of checks.
Yeah, I feel that. That's how I feel about my Uno deck. It's like the goofiest, dumbest, most gimmickiest, stupid deck I've ever made or conceived of. But like it is a 5-color combo deck that needs to kind of combo off fast. Otherwise, because it doesn't do anything. If you make any like huge budget constraints, and a lot of the cards are really specific and you can't change them, I'm not going to spend any money on this gimmick deck I'm never going to play.
Yeah, and I think people really do understand now that you couldn't like invest at like $60 into a new deck and you have that budget list. And then you can sort of upgrade it over the next few months if you end up liking it a lot into a actual like $200, $300 deck with all the cards that actually feel good in it, right? Because it's totally fine to make some budget constraints. Like I'm not going to run Stock Up. I'm going to run Quick Study, right? Because I don't have the, $6 needed for that uncommon, right? So, going from that, like just like slowly piecemeal upgrading a deck is like a really nice way to get into the format as well. I think Commander is actually just like the most budget format besides Pauper, just because you can go like, okay, great, I'm going to put $60 into this deck, and then I'll put $10 here next month and $10 in next month. It's like a piggy bank.
Yeah.
It's like old Modern, back when you could, build 8 rack for $50, and then you would just slowly buy one more Thoughtseize and one more Lily of the Veil, and then you would just have the full list eventually. I think you can take the same approach to Casual Commander. I also want to double down on what Snail said about like thinking about how fun the deck would be, to play. Because I feel like a lot of people like construct decks and they're like, I'm gonna, do this thing, and then they realize that thing is too samey each time, or they don't like that thing that much. So like focus in on that before you actually make the jump to constructing the list physically in paper.
I think there's definitely also a balance of how fun is it for me versus how fun is it for my opponents. My Malfagor deck is not always fun for my opponents, if you can possibly believe that. However, I have so much fun playing it, and I think it creates an interesting table dynamic, even if it's not necessarily what people go into a game looking for. So that's one that I am willing to have regardless.
I think people have like this notion that my decks are cruel and unusual. And mostly, yeah. I mean, it's not like I'm not like busting out like a turn 4 combo or anything like that like hard locks the game. I'm not like Lavinia knowledge pooling either, right? Like all these sort of effects happen like well beyond like turn 7 or so. But still, like, I Magic's a zero sum game. You know what I mean? Like the happiness, if you're having happy, like you're taking up the happiness in the room when you're playing Magic the Gathering. And I listen, like I've been on this Emrakul Worst Fears train recently because I'm tired of playing just my Magic. I need to play your Magic as well. And the more Magic I play, the better. It's awesome. No, in all seriousness, I don't know. Because in one breath, these decks sound annoying as fuck to play against, and it's a common like joke angled at me, like, "Oh, Elk's decks sound so miserable." But my play group likes them, or at least they tell me they like them.
Yeah, there's a balance to this. Obviously, you have to take into account like not just what the deck's theme is, but like the power level. Because even if the thing that your deck is doing is some level of like something that could in theory be unfun for somebody. If the deck is slow and clunky enough that your opponents have time to respond, I mean, like, most people aren't going to like freak out. I talked about this in my most recent video. When people say like, oh, I'm bringing out my fun deck, they go, it has no interaction. It doesn't do anything. You don't have to respond to it. It's like, that's not like, people take it a little too far. You don't have to have a do nothing deck, be fun. You should take into account your opponents a little bit, but like, don't let it like destroy the deck that you want to build.
I think another interesting feature of decks that I think can affect how fun they are to play against is how much control over the game they're exerting. And that can be a control deck, but that could also be just like an interaction heavy mid-range deck. I have my Shroom Slide deck, and that deck in principle isn't like a clearly unfun deck to play against. Like it's an artifact synergy, it's doing a lot of stuff deck, but it is a control deck. So people tend to dislike it more than a lot of decks. Whereas I have other decks where they kind of cede control in some areas of the game. They leave some things up to circumstance. They leave some things up to top decks. They're willing to let some things just happen and be okay with it. My Rata deck is the essence of that. I'm playing my stuff. I'm doing my best to play along, but I really, I'm not trying to exert heavy control over the state of the game. Whatever happens, happens. I'll play along with it. And I think it's interesting to kind of compare that. I personally enjoy having a range of decks where I can have my more controlling decks and my more kind of free-playing, easygoing decks. I know some people definitely lean into the control more, and I feel like Elk, your decks definitely give me that sense.
Listen, the table does not 3v1 me every other game. That never happens at all. My decks are incapable of being that big of an arch enemy. They are sometimes. I have a great time with it though. And that's the thing, is you really need to just bring a good attitude to the table.
That's like, way more important than what deck you're playing.
Yeah, exactly. No, I understand. Like, listen, I'm like, my Delirium's almost online. Emrakul's going to be coming down any second now. I'm just like, if I play the Traverse the Uvenwald, the clock's ticking, right? So and when my opponents start showing each other their hands and going like, how do we kill this guy? I'm not like, oh, classic commander, these players are so salty. I like, no, it's like, it makes total sense that they're ganging up on me.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of fun in being the arch enemy and having it be an uphill battle, but it be possible for your opponents to overcome you. Like, I think that's a really fun dynamic if you can create it. Like, that
is my favorite thing with the Brazella Hate Bears lock, is because I can still get blown out in that deck. And it's happened a majority of the time. One of the people in my playgroup plays Grimgrin, and I need to think about Grimgrin being in play before I go for the lock. Because if I go for the lock and then he's just like, okay, great, I'm going to sack my dork, untap Grimgrin, attack, kill your angel, I'm dead in the water. Like, it's, there's a lot of actual counterplay to these decks that I build, and I wouldn't have it any other way. I don't want an uninteractable combo win.
Definitely. That makes sense.
This all leads perfectly into like the first Beseech the Mirror question. This is perfect. So if you want to ask us questions, you just need to put mirror in your question. So this is from Nathaniel Forlorn. They ask, mirror, is it possible to bring a fun deck with a typically salty commander, like Grand Arbiter Augustine IV as an example? Will it always be a salty bad time for the table?
I think Grand Arbiter is a bad example of this, because when you put that fuck into play, he is certainly taxing your opponent's spells. Like, there's like no way around that. And I think that's just like inherently the part of the card that is the most annoying about him. So that one, the hatred sort of intrinsically built. However, taking a generic, the salt is there because they're so frequent, as opposed to the card's actual impact on the game, for instance, is a lot more of an apt thing. Like, I totally believe that you could build a fun scrolling.
It's scrolling through salty commanders.
Yes.
Let's use Narset as an example. I've seen people build Narset Enlightened Master as a pure Voltron, where they're just using it to cast equipment for free and like auras or whatever. And it's not take infinite turns instantly. It's just, I'm buffing up my Narset Enlightened Master.
Not gonna lie, that sounds kind of terrible. Card 6 mana, yo. What are you doing?
But would you be salty about that version of Narset? I feel like most players wouldn't, right?
Yeah. There are definitely going to be some decks where, it depends on whether you're playing with kind of new randoms every time. Like, if that's the case, then maybe you're going to have some troubles. But like, if you're playing with some level of overlap of people, I think people should start to get the gist that, you're not playing that insert deck here deck.
Here we go. Satoru Umezawa. I think you can build that fun, even though he's traditionally pretty salty.
Is that the Dimir guy? Yes, it is. Okay.
Yeah, it's the thing that gives everything ninjutsu.
Yeah. But if you actually play ninjas, it should be fine.
Well, I mean, so long as you're not like packing the Blightsteel.
Yeah, exactly.
No. Actually put Phage in your deck, and then you need to counter or stifle her ETB. That's fun.
Yeah. I think for Grand Arbiter, what's the least salty thing you can do with him? I guess Storm, right? Will you actually care about the cost reduction as opposed to the taxing effect?
Every Grand Arbiter deck cares about the cost reduction, and part of it is just that like it's a.
Well, I mean, like actually care about it, not just like, ooh, my things are less Yahoo.
It's a sphere of resistance. It's annoying. That's the effect.
I know. I'm trying to think about what to do about Grand Arbiter. I don't know.
Yeah, Grand Arbiter is, I feel like the stronger half of the card is the tax. Like, you're not going to be able to get around that.
Yeah, I mean, I actually do think he's a pretty decent Storm Commander.
Unless you build, oh my god, what if you built a Grand Augustin deck that was all about feeding your opponent's cards? That sounds really funny. They're more expensive. I just don't know if that's fun to play against, but some sort of group huggy thing feels like it would be kind of funny.
Honestly, there aren't that many commanders that are super high on the salt score on EDH. It's mostly cards of the 99, I feel like.
Yeah.
I guess other than Vorinclex, he's number 3 if I ignore Nadu.
Ooh, can you make Toxrill fun? I don't think so.
I don't know what I would do with Toxrill other than wipe my opponent's board. That's the only thing it does. It doesn't do anything else.
Every time I see Toxrill, it's like hyper ramp into it and then I win, or I hyper ramp into it and I explode, and then there's no in between.
Nah, the in between is I don't play creature decks. So someone plays Toxrill and I just sit there and I play my non-creature stuff and then I win because I don't get attacked.
I guess one example of this would be, my most viewed video was about a Xyrus the Writhing Storm pump spells deck. Xyrus the Writhing Storm is not a popular, not a fun commander. Like, it's wheels. Nobody likes wheels. Everybody hates wheels. And so I definitely got a lot of comments on that about, how am I supposed to play this deck? People are going to murder the Zyrus instantly. They don't want to get wheeled and snaked to death. And that I don't really know about, because that's definitely a case where the salt factor is pretty high already. And you got to really convince people that you're not going to wheel them.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, is Zyrus salty? I don't think I've ever seen anyone complain about it. I feel like this is part of my problem is too many people complain about too many things, and it's just like, I don't know, man. Like,
to be fair, I feel like a large portion of the game changers and bans list is dealing with wheel decks. Like, that's obviously a commonly decided upon problem archetype.
Yeah, but that's Narset's problem. That's not Zyrus's problem.
I didn't realize Kona was this popular. Sorry, I'm completely off track. I've just been scrolling through the most popular commanders this entire time.
Did we answer that question? I guess kind of.
Yeah, we did.
Good enough. If you want a better answer, ask it again.
Yeah, that's a good idea. That's a good idea. Oh, okay. So this question I wanted to bring up just because I disagree with their example. So Benjamin Samble asks, Mirror, mirror, I put a non-bow in my 99 to ask, how do you feel about win more cards in casual EDH? Specifically, Junkwinder, which is a personal favorite. Is Junkwinder a win more card? What the heck?
I read that comment. I was like, I don't think Junkwinder's that bad.
I called it one in my first video.
No, really?
He directed at me.
Junkwinder is not a win more card. What the hell are we talking about?
My friend wanted to put it in a Volo deck, and I was like, you should do more things that do things before you're popping off with Volo.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I agree with it in Volo. I'm thinking a lot more like, oh, look, it's my like artifact tokens deck, and I just like spell swindled your spell and I tapped all of your possible attackers. Like, that's funny.
Right. Yeah.
Or like in a white blue deck, right? Yeah.
It's not a broadly win more card.
It's like a low cost card because it has affinity for tokens. So it's in a tokeny deck. It's really easy to get this down to just 2 mana.
Yeah. Sorry, I was so offended by the Junkwinder part. Can you reread the question?
How do you feel about win more cards?
I don't put them in my decks.
I don't generally put them in my decks, although I think it depends a little bit. I am packing the Sunbirds Invocation in my Rata deck just because I think I do need some level of, like, my cards are shit in that deck. Like, I need some level of escalation or else I'm not going to win. I'm not packing any good bombs.
Yeah, mostly this just comes down to, once again, like minimizing the lowness of a floor in a deck. Like, a win more card inherently is not that good. It's only good when you're already at the ceiling. So why would I put it in my deck when I want to avoid having a very low floor? I really want high consistency, that sort of deal.
Yeah, because it's like it amplifies the thing you want to do, but it doesn't do the thing you want to do. So I think WCS is the classic example. It amplifies your tokens or counters, but it doesn't actually put any tokens or counters in play. You need something else that does that.
Yeah. This is why my Rata deck is my example of a deck I've put a win more card into, because I calculated it. I was like, I can definitely fit a win more card in here. This deck is so goddamn consistent. Like, the consistency levels are off the charts here. I can fit a win more card in here.
Yeah, I think it's about the right amount of win more cards.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
I run the worst win more card of all time in one of my decks in Cura. I have Reliquary Tower. And it's just because I can tutor for it. That's literally the only reason, is because if I sack Cura to a, like, not Escape Shift, but it would be something along the lines of
Life's Legacy.
Yeah, Life's Legacy, Momentous Fall, one of these effects. Not greater good because you discard 3 to that. I want to be able to find Reliquary Tower as my first land off that, so I can play the other 2 lands and also keep the cards I drew. And the fact that I can just tutor for Reliquary Tower every game is what makes it actually good in that list. And I don't always win even when I pop off right away, and sometimes I'll need to keep my graveyard empty for a loop that I have in the deck, which is way too convoluted to explain in less than 5 minutes. So, but it's there.
Yeah, we'll skip the loop. Yeah, I think it's about running the right amount of, like, oh, if I untap with this, I'm gonna go crazy and probably win the game. You can't fill your deck with all of those, because at some point you have to have the thing that it amplifies. And I find a lot of people run just too many of those effects. So I think win more cards are fine if you limit yourself to just a couple.
That's how I feel people are with Phyrexian Arena. If I untap with this thing, I win the game. That's what it feels like.
That's different. I like to run 10 Phyrexian Arena-esque effects. And then I always have one early on, because I want that early to get the card of it. This is a different question.
Yeah. As a final example, I think the balance is the key. And a good example of this is my brother had a Joda deck. Joda is a fundamentally win more commander. And my brother was kind of having this experience where either he would pop off and go wild with his Joda deck, or he would get stomped with it. So he ended up making his deck super, super protection spell oriented, just like nothing but protection spells. And then suddenly, and specifically to where most of his low-cost cards were protection spells, so he would often hit them off of his Jota triggers. And then suddenly the deck, its ceiling was a bit less high because a lot of the cards were protection spells instead of just like more snowball bullshit. And also the floor was a bit higher because he had more ability to keep his stuff around.
I think that the Feast or Famine deck is like one of the biggest traps for especially new players. Happens all the time. Like all the time. Just they're like, oh, when I have my commander, when I do this, I'm gonna go crazy. And then they eat like a board wipe and just do nothing for the rest of the game.
Yes, definitely. And that's why I will always encourage people to, start out with a very consistent, very resilient deck, and then maybe you can start to expand out and see what you're comfortable with. But if you're trying to have somebody have fun with the format, I would always, I don't know that I would hand somebody my Rata deck exactly because it tends to have a lot of triggers that can get a little overwhelming for a newer player. But that style of deck is going to be awesome because you are always having fun. You're very resilient to every possible form of hate, except for the ones that are not accepted socially in the format, like mass land destruction. And yeah, you're going to be having a good time.
Yeah, I mean, if someone wants to get like coughing babied like by a table full of nuclear bombs, more power to them. Just make sure you know what you're getting into with the new deck.
I just don't want people to get driven away from the format because they build themselves like this disgusting win more pile. They get stomped into the mud and then they go, oh, that's what this format is? Because that doesn't have to be what this format is. But I think a lot of the Commander ecosystem and sometimes Commander content in some cases pushes people to, look for the flashiest, most snowbally things when that's not what's going to lead you to have the most fun.
Mirror, mirror, I paid $20 green to ask the judge to ask, what is your opinion on Ward versus Hexproof? Which one is better for the game?
So it's very blatantly obvious that Ward is the better design. However, there is an argument to be had that it's made designers more lenient in giving bullshit cards high Ward costs because, it's not hexproof. Voha is a big example of this. I think it really does come down to the design base by base. I don't think it's Ward's fault that Voha exists. And like, for example, Ward 3 feels perfectly fine on Oketra, right? I think we can all agree that that's not an issue even remotely. And it's mostly because that's on a 7-drop.
Absolutely. Yeah. If you, I think it's fair to have point of ward per 2 mana that went into the card, maybe +1, maybe, but I think, Oketra feels right with Ward 3. Voha would feel right with Ward 2. Yeah.
I mean, Howler has Ward 2, and I think that's pretty fine. It's not like really been that big of a deal, and I've played against Howler a couple times. So.
Yeah, Ward 2 definitely feels a lot less bad than Ward 3. Just like that 3rd mana really puts on the hurt.
4 mana Swords to Plowshares, and that's the most efficient thing. Legitimately. Oh.
Right.
I forgot Slaughter Pact.
Evoked Solitude, But, yeah. It's the 3's a lot because that's stapling an entire murder on top of your kill spell.
Right.
Yeah, I agree that Ward is better than Hexproof, but I think they got too cutesy with Ward. Like where they're like, Ward sacrifice a legendary artifact or whatever. And it's like,
I love that shit.
Oh, that's just Hexproof.
I like that. No,
that's just Hexproof.
Wait.
I love that design space. That's amazing design space.
Just put Hexproof on the card.
Yeah. No. Hang on. That's on Sauron, the fucking Dark Lord, and that's fucking thematic as shit. So I don't want to hear it, pal. It's a flavor win. Think of it as flavor text. It's the same reason why fucking Catilda has protection from werewolves. Like that shit's never coming up. But it's there because Catilda has protection from werewolves, and it's there on Sauron because Sauron fucks up legends.
Yeah.
I guess. I don't know. I feel like when the ward number or restriction is too high, it is just hexproof at that point. And it's like, I mean, I know it's technically not, right? You could besage you to make your spell uncounterable and still blow stuff up, but that's like not many people are doing that.
My beef with Ward, and you guys let me know what you think about this. I don't know how I feel about it being a trigger. I would kind of just prefer it be like baseline, the spells cost 2 more, but I don't know, maybe that from a rules standpoint is too challenging.
It is a little weird that it's a trigger. You have actually issues like with Roaming Throne because it's a trigger. Because
it would double the trigger, but it has Ward 2, so you could have made it Ward 1. It'd be the same thing.
Roaming Throne should not have Ward 3 too, by the way.
Yeah, Roaming Throne is hilarious though.
Right.
But like, think about Ward on Sway Loon, and you put Roaming Throne into your Merfolk deck. That's doubling the Ward on Sway Loon, which doesn't feel like a feature. It feels a little bit like a bug. You know what I mean? It just doesn't feel that intuitive.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of picking up what Snail's saying.
If it said spells that target this thing cost X more to cast, would that break anything?
Oh, well, it would break. What's the name of the enchantment from Duskmourn, the 2-mana one?
Oh, yeah.
Nowhere to hide.
But that's like designed around Ward. Like, let's imagine Ward was, that card wouldn't exist if Ward was designed differently. It would be a different card.
Yeah, the only other thing is, like, designers like to do this, like, really shitty, cute, like, tech thing where it's like, ooh, look, Ward's in the set. Now we're going to put a card in the set that's a kill spell that can't be countered.
Yeah.
In Duskmourn, it was Nowhere to Hide. In Murders at Karlov Manor.
Yeah, there was a couple of them in Murders at Karlov Manor.
There was 2 of them in Murders at Karlov Manor, and that shit pisses me off, honestly. Have them have Ward.
Yeah.
Or don't, like, it's like, why? Why did we print kills? Why do we print Ward if we're going to just print kill spells that kill through Ward?
Yeah.
It makes no damn sense.
Well, also, like, the more we get of that, the less counter spells work as a form of protection. And, like, that just feels weird to me.
Mistrise Village already got printed, Snail. It's over for counter spells.
Counter spells are cooked.